Well, howdy, Tri-State. Did you ever have one of those weeks or those days where things would have been better had you not gotten involved? Like you start cleaning out like the hall closet, and you're like, I'm gonna rearrange, like, I don't know, our sweaters or our coats or something like that. And then when you do, you realize that you've got the Christmas decorations that haven't been rearranged from last year. So you have to pull out the coats to get the Christmas decoration. But when you do that, you find out that you've got like somebody's like leftover sports equipment from the kids, and you got to find a place to put that. And like by the time the dominoes all tip over, you've got like a hallway full of clutter. Like things would have been better if you just left things be. Like I remember one time when I was in an undergrad, it was like a final exam. And there was this whole section of the exam that was a true-false section. So I'm like, I got this, right? True-false, like you can't go wrong. When I got the exam back, I did okay, but just okay, because on the true-false section, I missed literally half. On a true-false, that means statistically speaking, I was just as well off as like a sleep-deprived ape. Like that's like you could flip a coin and do just as well as I did. Like, it would have been better off just closing my eyes and guessing, right? And so a lot of us, when we live in what we call the postmodern, post-Christian, post-whatever world, often in our workplace, our families, our neighborhoods, we might open our mouths to share the gospel or open our mouths to share our opinion or how Christian values illuminate a particular cultural issue. But when we do, we get the pushback that Christians are all hypocritical, we're all too judgmental, we're all too this, too that. And we think, man, it would have been better off if we just never opened our mouths to begin with. It would have been better off if we just kept things to ourselves. We'd be much better off. And there's a lot of people in this world, in this room even, that would think that they would have been better off had they not screwed up in some way in their past. Because we all live with the markings of something, whether it's the sins that we have committed, the sins that others have committed against us, or just the circumstances and the tragedies that we inhabit as a society. And when that happens, nothing goes according to our plan, and we think that if we had done better, or if that hadn't happened to us, or if this other situation was not happening, then we wouldn't have a proverbial hall full of clutter. We wouldn't have lives full of disarray, full of confusion, full of sorrow. So a lot of us live with this tension of feeling like I've got this plan in my mind of what would really make me happy or make me flourish in this world, and there's some other thing getting in the way of that. Sometimes it's me. Sometimes it's somebody else. Sometimes it's just the circumstances that we experience in general. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to Esther chapter 2, and we'll look at the few verses there at the end. Esther chapter 2. We started this last week with Randy, and we met some different characters here. So we have Esther and Mordecai. Mordecai is Esther's cousin, but he sort of becomes her adoptive father. When the Jews left exile and went back to their homeland, some folks stayed behind. Now, the Old Testament makes very clear provisions that says, listen, like value your land. So for Jews to remain behind raises some questions about what their actual motives were. And even Esther is sort of sucked up into this whole political machinery. And so we see this Jewish girl now having this high position, queen, even though the king has now turned his palace into Hugh Hefner's mansion. Like that's kind of what we're looking at here. And so Mordecai and Esther are learning what it means to have faithful presence in a world where God seems to be absent. And both of them are very dynamic characters, meaning that where they are at the beginning of the book isn't necessarily where you and I want to be, and where they are at the end is a little bit closer to the character and the heart of God, but we see them evolve and change with time. So Esther chapter 2, we'll start in verse 19. It says that now when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther had not made known her kindred or her people, as Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So Mordecai is actually doing pretty well at this point, primarily with his occupation and his position of prominence. Like the city gate was kind of where like major things happened. Like the movers and shakers of the world would be hanging out at the king's gate. And so what he's overhearing then is that there were these two eunuchs, and back in the ancient world, if you wanted to have people guard your harem, you got eunuchs to do it. But that usually wasn't calling for, like, they usually didn't have volunteers step forward, right? So if you were in that position, you might have some grounds to be like disgruntled. And so these two disgruntled employees, like these two Secret Service agents, said, "Listen, let's get our revenge and let's take him out." And so when Mordecai uncovers this, justice is served on his behalf through Queen Esther. But at this point, neither one of them had revealed the fact that they were, by the way, Jews living in this pagan city, this pagan region of Persia. So chapter 3 says this: After these things, King Xerxes promoted Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedat, I'm not even going to pronounce that, and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" And when they spoke to him day after day, and he would not listen to them, they told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. But when he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, so as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. So what's happening here? So Haman is this official within the king's leaders, and here's the thing: like Haman has to rely on the king to actually tell people bow down to this guy. Like he doesn't command respect on his own, so he has to rely on someone else to kind of promote him. And for reasons that we're not clear on, Mordecai refuses to bow down to this guy. Now, it could be that he's just doing that, like refusing out of religious principles, but there's other places in the Old Testament where we see Jews bowing down to government officials, so there's not really a prohibition against bowing down here. It could be that there's some strife between the ethnic backgrounds, because there's sort of a long history here. Maybe Mordecai is remembering that, but we're still not all that clear here. What we are clear on, though, is that this now is starting some friction, and for reasons that, again, are unclear, Mordecai is choosing this thing, of all things, to take a stand. Like his adoptive daughter being drafted into the harem, like that's fine. Bowing down to Haman, that's where we draw the line. And that's weird in a lot of ways. And so what he reveals to them then, at that point, and only that point, that when they ask him, he says, "It's because I'm a Jew. I'm Jewish," he says. And they're looking at him like, "Really?" Because the Jews, they went home. You've been here for like decades. Your name literally means the person who worships Marduk. Like you serve in the king's court. You're eating a ham sandwich right now. Like we're not buying this. We're not buying the fact that you have this principled stand when your hypocrisy is so glaring. And isn't that the way it always is? for those of us who do want to take a stand against this or that, and we often get sucked into the world systems of power or beauty or status, and when we do, we become assimilated, and it's only every now and then that we emerge from that accommodation to take a stand against principled moral issues. So how that might play out is, I know a lot of young guys. We want to spend time with our friends, including our non-believing friends, and what happens is that the whole season comes around where one of them decides to want to get married, and they throw a bachelor party, and at that bachelor party they said they want to go to a strip joint, or they want to go out to Hooters or Tilted Killer, or wherever it is, right? And that young man now has to decide whether or not to participate in that. Or not, or similarly, like a lot of young women or even older women, their girlfriends get out, for a night on the town. They all go out. And they want to see like Magic Mike or like 50 Shades or whatever the smut du jour is. So like they and all their cougar girlfriends go out and they participate in this, right? And so like after these things kind of happen. You have a conversation in the office the next day or the week after about the sanctity of marriage, and everyone looks at you like, really? Really? Because all of us in here, none of us in here can honestly say that we've never done anything shady. Like we are all hypocrites to the core. And we can make a really big deal out of morals and out of values, and we forget the fact that morals and values never saved anybody. Or alternately, there may be some of you who may have gone even further than the whole, like just going to the movies or the strip club. There are people who live with the shame and the hurt and the regret from deep, lasting past sins. We have just a culture, a world, a community just full of people who live with the shame of their sins. We have unwed moms. We have divorced couples. We have folks whose parenting and whose marriages did not go according to plan. How can we possibly have the moral high ground in a culture where these kinds of things happen? How can Christians possibly say that we can hold fast to the sanctity of marriage when we have those types of things happen? Let's keep reading, and we'll get some clues along the way. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, the 12th year of King House, I'll call him Xerxes. It's just easier. The Greek name is Xerxes. They cast pure, that is, they cast lots before Haman day after day, and they cast it month after month till the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, "There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, that they may put it into the king's treasuries." So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of that guy, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, "The money is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you." So what's happening here is that Haman is so angry, like just so violently, I want to hurt him, angry at Mordecai for not bowing down. He says, "Oh, you're Jewish? Okay, I'm going to have your people wiped out." And he's so mad, he tells the king, "Listen, I'll pay 10,000 talents." Now, in her commentary on Esther, Karen Job says that that's probably about 2/3 of the entire national treasury. Like that's like 2/3 of the entire kingdom. Now, earlier, like King Xerxes had this whole parade. Remember when Vashti refused to come dance? It took time to actually just march out all his stuff. For Haman to say, "Listen, I'll pay 2/3 of that value." Number one, he doesn't have that. He's just exaggerating. It's like saying, "I'm going to pay $1 million to whoever can wipe out all the Snuggies that they have on the shelves at Walmart, because we have to eliminate things that offend us." So Haman is so violently angry against this, and he's basically saying, listen, if one thing happens that goes against what I believe or what I agree with, I'm going to make sure that I can silence the entire population of those who might also have some things to say about me. And the truth is that we live in a world that we call postmodern or post-Christian or again whatever, where Christianity is not really tolerated, but opposed. Like a generation or so ago, if you wanted to follow Jesus, people would look at you like you're weird. But today it's a little bit worse than that. And a few months ago, just this past year, a guy named Frank Bruni, was an op-ed columnist for the New York Times. He said this about Christianity. First of all, he laments the fact that Christians have beliefs, that he says, that are, quote, ossified over centuries and that aren't easily shaken. Then he says, Christianity prioritizes scattered passages of ancient texts as if the advances of science and knowledge meant nothing. So, he concludes, our debate about religious freedom should include a conversation about freeing religions and religious people from prejudices that they needn't cling to and can indeed jettison, much as they've jettisoned other aspects of their faith's history, rightly bowing to the enlightenments of modernity. In other words, Bruni is saying, listen, it's not just that Christians are weird, it's that Christians are dangerous. If you hold fast to the truths of the Old or New Testament, if you hold fast to a book written 2,000 or more years ago, you're not just wrong, you're evil. And you can keep your faith, but change it, adapt it, fit it to suit the needs of our ever-progressive society. And so we aren't seeing the mass extermination of Christians, at least not here in America, although we certainly do see plenty of that overseas. But you and I are living in a world where Christianity is increasingly being squeezed out because Christians often fail to bow down to our culture's understanding or ideas about political morals or sexual norms or any of those other things that would tend to be hotly debated. And so other words, let's not even debate this. Let's just say you either change or you become a relic of the past. And here's the thing. Esther and Mordecai are occupying a system that would make the U.S. look like Disneyland. I mean, this is now coming down the pipe. Now the king is officially saying, yeah, Haman, you are absolutely right. Let's deal with this. So in verse 12, it goes on to say this. The king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict, according to all that Haman commanded, was written to the king's satraps and to the governors over all the provinces and to the officials of all the peoples, to every province in its own script and every people in its own language. It was written in the name of King Xerxes and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with instructions to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. The couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. And so here's the interesting thing. Because earlier Haman was angry and he was just shooting his mouth off. But now that anger has metastasized into a whole political machine. Like, this is all very premeditated, very methodical, planned out, transcribed, translated into different languages, sent throughout all the kingdom. This is a whole machinery at work. This is no longer just an emotional, like, gut reaction. This is now like official policy. And the irony is that earlier Mordecai, a Jew, had saved the king's life, but now Mordecai is in danger by the same man that he saved. And that's tough. And this is what it says in chapter 4. We'll read just a few verses here. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. The thing that's really difficult about Esther, the book of Esther, is that when you compare the book of Esther to other ancient stories, I mean, talking about the ones that are in the Bible, it's not unusual to see God's people being threatened. I mean, and usually what happens when God's people are threatened, God shows up. So like back when Israel was held captive by the Egyptians for hundreds of years, God shows up, right, with a series of colossal, monumental, mind-blowing plagues. Like God shows up and he guides them through the wilderness because he showed up in a pillar of cloud and fire. Like he guided them because he showed up, right? When the prophets of Baal were saying, listen, we are the biggest game in town, through Elijah, God showed up and revealed that the prophets of Baal could do nothing, but God could do everything. Like God showed up in this spectacular display of fire. Like God is a God who shows up. In the book of Esther, God does not show up, at least not the way that we're used to seeing. And if you read the entire book of Esther, you'll notice that God never receives mention, not once. So much so that some of the ancient peoples thought that maybe this really wasn't a Christian or a Jewish book at all. Maybe we shouldn't even include this in their ancient Bibles. But here's what we have to see. We're kind of seeing things through the lens right now of Mordecai. And Mordecai finds himself embedded in the middle of this story, and he doesn't see the end. We see the entire story. We see how all the pieces fit together. And the things that one might call coincidence or dramatic irony or whatever you want to call it, God is actually orchestrating those things for his glory, for his purpose, for a greater plan. So it's ironic because on the one hand, we have people in the ancient world, people like Esther, who are kind of trapped between these two different identities. I mean, remember, like Esther, talked about last week. I mean, she was called to please the king, and did she have a choice? Well, not really, but she still won. Like she still won the king's affection. So there's some moral ambiguity here. We have Mordecai who's saying, "Listen, I'm gonna serve the king and serve him well, but I'm also going to live as one of the Persians." Like we see people who are making compromises and people who are living in the midst of moral ambiguity. And here's my point. There are some things that we can't necessarily call good in and of themselves. This scene that we're looking at right now with the king threatening the lives of the Jews could hardly be called good. But then again, neither could Mordecai living amongst the Persians and serving as a government official. That couldn't be called good. But then neither could Esther living as queen. That couldn't be called good. The fact that they didn't go back at all couldn't be called good. But God allows each of those things to happen and happen in such a way that when we put them all together, maybe they're not just coincidental. Like maybe it's no accident that Esther has now become queen. Maybe it's no accident that both of them are here in Persia. Maybe it's no accident that Mordecai chose that moment to not bow down. Maybe it's no accident that the king is making all of these things happen. Maybe it's no accident then that the king would be sleepless later in the story and would then choose at that point to honor Mordecai. Maybe it's no accident that God would put all of these things together for the good of those who love him, and that he would allow this story to kind of unfold and unfurl so that the Jewish people and all God's people by extension would receive grace, would receive blessing, and would receive the ability to flourish in a hostile world. See, a lot of us in here can get really hung up on individual moral issues. I'm not even saying that those aren't significant or they don't matter. But a lot of us can actually go the opposite direction of Mordecai, and we can become more like Haman. See, when Haman said things don't go my way, I'm going to blame all those people, then you and I can very easily do the same kind of abstraction and say, listen, like when we are threatened by one particular type of person, then all those people must be that way, whether it's those who don't believe in God, those who don't follow the Christian faith, whether it's those who are from a different denominational background, those from a different religion entirely. And we can say, listen, we don't have to worry about those godless pagans, right, or those liberals, or those Muslims. We don't have to worry about them because they're out there, we're in here, we're the good ones, and we're to make sure that we flourish. And we forget the fact that maybe the gospel is about something more than individual moral issues. That we can become very prideful we can become prideful in two ways. We can be prideful through our freedoms and through saying that we are masters of our own fate. We are the captains of our own soul, and we don't need religion to tell us what to do. That would be very arrogant and prideful. But we can also become very arrogant and prideful by saying, listen, we're going to stick to the Bible. We're going to be good Christian moral people. And we're going to be the really good ones. And we can allow religion then to foster pride within us so that we look down on others in our culture. And both of those are wrong because both of those don't see the broader story that God has for us. See, a lot of us live with this horribly awkward tension of knowing that things are really, really broken, knowing that in some ways that we have contributed to that brokenness, and now we don't know what to do. That the plan has been shattered, the plan is no longer in motion, now what? I mean, the whole language of it'll get better tomorrow doesn't seem to really work or make you feel better when you know that things are that jacked up. And the wonderful, beautiful part of this whole larger story of the Bible is that rather than God waiting around for man to get it right, God enters into the human story through Jesus so that through him, he could annihilate all of the evil around us, and he could actually bring us closer to him through that process. If you have your Bibles, turn quickly to Colossians chapter 2. Colossians 2, verses 13 and following says this, "And you who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him." That's why on the same night that Jesus was taken into custody, he told his disciples there in the upper room that in this world you'll have trouble and tribulation, but take heart, I've overcome the world. If we truly trust in Jesus, then the things that we see on the news, the things we read in the paper or on Facebook or from our friends, they may trouble us, but they provoke us to deeper faith rather than offend us and stir us into anger. They may produce tears but not clenched fists. We recognize there's a greater plan at work, and if things are going bad in the story, it's because the story isn't over yet. We haven't yet seen the way that God's going to work all things together for his good and for his glory. Now again, there may be some people in our world, and even in this room, where your past sins and your past regrets may reasonably disqualify you from certain things or certain positions, even within the church. And that happens, and I'm sorry about that. But God God can use folks who have deep, lasting regrets, and he can transform that into something beautiful. I mean, if you've been through a messy divorce, if you've been through an unwed pregnancy, if you've been through those types of things that are traditionally looked down upon culturally, especially by the Christian community, if you've been through those types of things, then God can orchestrate those things. He can bring you forgiveness. He can bring you transformation. He can bring you a greater plan and a greater sense of usefulness, so that even despite those things, you can see a greater plan unfold before you, and you can flourish in a way that you never dared imagine. And part of what that means then for us is that through our stories, through our individual contact with this greater plan, through the way that Jesus reaches into the soil of our lives and blossoms this good fruit to the surface, when we share those types of stories, that the unbelieving world out there says, wow. I mean, wouldn't it be awesome? Wouldn't it be awesome if instead of, I mean, what happens now is that people like Bruni, who write these kinds of things for the New York Times, says, listen, Christians are bad, and let's ignore them, or let's make them change. Wouldn't it be awesome if, like the people in the Old Testament who were thrown into confusion at the king's command, would it be awesome if people in our world said, really, the Christians? They're really so bad? Aren't they the ones that are really good for our culture? Aren't they the really ones who are really good for our society? Wouldn't it be awesome if through our message, through our stories, we could slowly, admittedly slowly, cultivate a better persona or a better image of what Christianity looks like for our unbelieving friends and neighbors? It takes time. It's not easy. There was a really great miniseries on HBO, you probably all saw it, Band of Brothers, about the paratroopers there in World War II. And there's one pivotal scene where they're going, the paratroopers are actually walking into the midst of heavy German fighting. And as they're walking there's others who are walking away from it, and they're saying, listen, you're heading into a war zone. Don't you know you'll be surrounded? And the leader looks back and says, we're paratroopers. We're supposed to be surrounded. As Christians, we will be surrounded by people who think, believe, and act differently than we do. It's our task to carry forth the gospel message into that hurting world, and to share what we believe, and to recognize that we are but bit players on a larger cosmic stage. We're Christians. We're supposed to be surrounded. Father, we're thankful for the book of Esther. We're thankful for the plan that you have that's much greater than anything that we can conceive of. Lord, we pray that we be people who would not merely react to the changing values of a changing world, but rather we would hold fast to what you've done for us. We're thankful that you use people like Esther and Mordecai, the lowly, to move and change the direction of all history. And Lord, we know that we've done that as well through your Son. Lord, I pray that we be people who would be just transformed in the knowledge of him, and that we would just grow continuously to be more like him in the days ahead. It's in his name we ask these things, and by your Spirit's power. Amen.